I'll tell the doc story, or this is what we are saying is our doc story and the value we add to New Zealand. And basically, The Last, the Loneliest, the Loveliest was a poem called The Cities, written by Rudyard Kipling in 1880. And this describes Auckland. And in 1880, he'd come to Auckland, the last discovered place on the planet, one of the loneliest, one of the loveliest. Maori came here 700 years ago, about the same time as Madagascar. It was really this incredible place on the end of the earth, discovered so late, and we were colonised out of the Pacific. But what we know is that New Zealand was part of Zealandia, and this as the land bridges broke off and as Gondwana separated, this piece of land that went all the way to New Caledonia, if you go to New Caledonia, it feels very much like New Zealand. And as these land bridges broke, we had no mammals. So we only got a bat and a sea lion. And so birds were the higher genera of all our ecosystems. And this is a rock wren, and Alpine Club saving our rock wren in the Homer Valley. But this is the ancient lineage of all the wrens in the world. And the mohua, the canary, is the ancient lineage of all the canaries. So we've got this, what we call this ancient antiquity, because the whole nature in New Zealand grew up without critters with teeth. So we've got these ancient dinosaurs like tuatara, kakapo. Very few countries in the world have night birds. And we've got the giant parrot, the kakapo. We had moa, we had kiwi. And these are unique birds found nowhere else on the planet. So it really is a country of birds. And that's why we've put such a call for Battle for the Birds. The Predator-Free New Zealand is about saving our birds because we identify so much with them as our national identity. And what we're doing with DOC is we're trying to reposition DOC as core to our national identity. If we don't look after this, our whole marketing proposition, our whole tourism industry disappears. If you come here and forests are being destroyed by possums and our waters are heading back the other way. So we see ourselves as a core part of the New Zealand economy. We also see ourselves as a core part of the New Zealand tourism industry, and until a few years ago, we didn't have tourism in any of our planning documents. We called everybody visitors. So by repositioning DOC at the core of the New Zealand tourism industry, we're saying that we're contributing, because tourism will this year go to New Zealand's number one, we are contributing about $5 billion to the economy by looking after this precious nature we have. So The Last, the Loveliest, the Loneliest, Kipling must have seen this incredible place in Auckland with Kokako and Huia. Well, Huia were gone by then, but certainly tui and bellbirds. And really, by 1836, we'd brought in possums from Australia. They failed, so we brought them back again in 1850. And then we brought in rabbits, and we put them in the Banks Peninsula, and they failed the first time, but we got them going again. And then Governor George Grey was the best of the lot. He got wallabies going, he got rabbits going in the Upper Hutt. And then we set up Greytown, and we got Queen Victoria's herd of the prime Hyde Park deer. We tried foxes. We were really creating this little Britain thing. And in 1880, we had our first classic debate about environment and economy. And some of our prominent scientists at the time and the farmers were saying the rabbits are decimating this country here. They're going right through Southland. We need to introduce stoats. And so 1880, just after Kipling wrote this poem, we introduced stoats. And so stoats, just within 8 years, the bird life had just collapsed. And within 6 years of stoats getting introduced from Dunedin, they were right through in Fiordland, and one of our most famous, the original ranger in New Zealand, Richard Henry, led this drive to shift kakapo onto Resolution Island to save kakapo. Charlie Douglas, one of our early explorers, describes kakapo so dense in New Zealand that you could shake a tree in the Landsborough and 5 would fall out, and being kept awake by the booming of this magnificent bird. So it's really, 100 years on, and my family, we were French, we were the executioners in France, and our last big job was Marie Antoinette. And we came here in 1842, and my original great-great-great-grandfather was so good at clearing forest that they named the town of Sanson after him because he cleared all the Kakatea and Miro all the way up the Hutt Valley. So 150 years later, we're trying to restore this travesty of what we did to this magnificent country that Maori were living in harmony with. And it's a huge job. We've got more biodiversity loss than anywhere else. We've got 2,800 threatened species, 72 threatened freshwater species. But we're determined we're going to win this war. And it's probably one of the most exciting times we've ever seen in conservation as we see the relevance of conservation to New Zealand society. So this is how we've repositioned DOC around our exceptional nature, this ancient antiquity, 80 million years, evolved in isolation. So many of our plants and animals are found nowhere on the planet, and people coming to New Zealand to see Kia, to see Oliver Island, to see those magnificent islands in the Hauraki Gulf. But it's our nature as Kiwis. It's that double entendre that when we see the Koro on an Air New Zealand plane in London, we associate it with this magnificent land of lakes, rivers and mountains and wildlife. And unlike many other countries, we've protected a third of our country for conservation. That's an area as big as Switzerland and Denmark together. So we're making a remarkable statement on the international stage about how we value nature. And the point I was trying to make in my introduction is I think New Zealand's gift to the world will be our treaty partner relationship. I don't think any country has done what New Zealand has done, and we heard the story of Mantle and what happened to Ngāi Tahu when the New Zealand government took over this inland part of Te Waipounamu. And as we restore that right and compensate our treaty partner for what we did 100 years ago, it's a remarkable renaissance of iwi and Crown working together. And when you think Ngāi Tahu, they were compensated about 130 million. They're now $1 billion business. They return about 30 million. The number one thing they vote for is whenua. So it's that feeling of land. And so the pressure they're putting on me now is to stop sending takahi to the North Island and create a new mainland population of takahi, because these are their Tonga species. This is the species that they valued, they loved, they grew up with. It was their mahinga kai. And when we took it with Tūhoi, we're putting in $2 million and they're putting in $2 million. So it's a remarkable way of celebrating conservation and growing it together. So ultimately, this treaty partner relationship is going to be Department of Conservation's greatest success. And we are doing it with commercial partners as well. I do acknowledge we've got Fonterra in the room today. So I've got a budget of about $350 million. We've got another 100 million that's coming in through partnerships. Fonterra's put in 20 million to fix water. Air New Zealand 10 million to get birds back on our great walks and to market our marine reserves. Genesis, restore blue ducks. Meridian Energy, restore kakapo. And Fulton Hogan, restore takahi. So it is an amazing relationship of commercial working with the public in terms of this belief in New Zealand and that we can fix this together. We cannot fix it alone. And then we've got this incredible relationship of 15,000 volunteers, 300 groups out there doing stuff for nature, be it doing some stoat traps up around the campground here, whatever it is. David asked me to talk about Antarctica, and I'm going to do it from the angle of the impact of Antarctica on New Zealand, because of all countries in the world, probably we feel one of the greatest connections to Antarctica, because we had that polar heroic era of Scott and Shackleton coming through. That was New Zealand's first time on the world stage. That was the equivalent of Cape Canaveral for the astronauts. So we grow up with this connection of Antarctica and we sort of understand what it means. It is part of our psyche. So the first is what we call the thermohaline circulation system. And basically Antarctica's got this great phenomenon, the greatest natural phenomenon on the planet of doubling in size over the winter. So it's sort of growing at a pace you can walk as the ice is freezing and pushing all those wildlife, except for the emperor penguins, to the edge of the pack ice at the moment. And as this sea ice is growing, it's pushing this salt water, and it's creating this huge dynamic of what we call the thermohaline circulation system. This is the Humboldt Current, and there's a big pulse of this water comes past New Zealand, past the east coast of Lyttelton and Chatham's, and if you took away all the water between the Chatham Islands and Christchurch, you'd just see this massive scouring of where these icebergs have grounded all over that area. And this pulse of heavy, dense Antarctic water is feeding our ecosystem. So it's vital. Our most significant fisheries is in that area between the Chatham Islands and New Zealand. That's the breeding ground of our hoki. And it's this rich, super rich cold water coming back that drives our ecosystems. And it also drives that Humboldt Current. It drives many of the currents in the South Atlantic. So it's a really important driver of ecosystems, of our weather, and really who we are as a country is sitting behind this system. Now, in a warming climate, if we get less sea ice and less power, then the whole system tips over. So it's incredibly important that we do this Antarctic research and really understand what's going on. Now, there's three remarkable surprises in Antarctic research. The first is the ozone hole, which was discovered in about 1976. And the first time the world got together and says, actually, we're going to solve an environmental problem as an international community. And we banned CFCs, and we think we can fix the ozone hole within about 50 years. And it has been going from these record highs, and you can see New Zealand is really exposed, and we have one of the higher incidents of skin cancer in the world because of this ozone hole. But it's also creating a unique dynamic in that we're getting record cooling in central Antarctica, and we're getting weather systems. So the weather relates in several big cells as it comes down from the tropics, and then we get this dense air rushing down over the South Pole and coming out and creating these katabatic winds. So as you get this variation between this extreme cold of central Antarctica and this warming outer, you're getting faster and faster winds. So this is one of the great dynamics we're facing at the moment, is these increasing westerly winds at something like 1,000-year highs. And as we fix that ozone hole, we also start to warm Antarctica and we see less sea ice. So the dynamics, it's incredibly sensitive to, we may fix a problem and another problem may be created. The other thing we're starting to see is this massive melting of ice shelves, and this is the ice shelf on the Antarctic Peninsula, which broke up. This is an area about half as big as Belgium, and it broke up over around about 30 days. And the ones we're really worried about at the moment are on the Amundsen Sea, where the sills of the glacier are the warmer water is starting to get under, and it only needs to be about 1 degree more, and it starts eroding that base layer. And of course, half of Antarctica sits out to the west, and it's just a whole lot of islands linked by ice. So what's happening here is no different to the nor'west winds that you can see. That might be one generating at the moment when you look at those lenticulars this morning. These winds are coming over the Antarctic Peninsula. The air warms up as it comes over. You just get a small amount of moisture in these crevasses, and that moisture drives down like a wedge until those whole ice sheets break up. And when they break up big time, and they will not be restored. And this is really one of the big issues in terms of sea level rise and the changing ecosystem we have in Antarctica. So the other one is Antarctic Peninsula is one of the most warming areas in the world, as is Siberia, as is the Alaskan area. So, and of course, warming here leads to more methane, so you're getting a greater warming issue. And last year was the warmest year ever. So this slide, I think, is really graphic, and this shows this increasing cyclones, and a cyclone typically takes 14 days to go around Antarctica. And these are 1,000-year high now, and it's pulling water out of the South Atlantic, out of the South Pacific, and it's pulling that warm water. So this warmer water is getting pulled, as these cyclones go faster, it's pulling this water, and you've literally got a fire hose. And the area we're most worried about is this coastline here, is where this warmer water is getting pulled out of the South Pacific and against these big ice shelves here. And this is all the lower land, and this is the area where climate change will probably have the biggest impact. It's also the warmest part of Antarctica. It's pretty good for New Zealand because we keep on getting clipped by westerlies, so we enjoy water. It's a lot harder for Australia. It's a lot harder for parts of South America. And the other interesting story is what's happening to our ecosystems. And on Crozet Island, we've got albatross who are increasing in numbers because it's windier and they're able to, launch, get more successful. Our albatross are heading into collapse because they're not, the winds are pulling away from those islands. So this is typically what's coming off Antarctica every 2 days. That's Wellington Harbour, and this is some of the science done by Victoria University, who are probably doing some of the leading science in this area along with NIWA. And that's just portraying every 2 days what's coming off Antarctica. So what has happened in New Zealand as a result of this is our whole climate system has shifted down a degree. So that's around about 500 miles. So the biggest impact has been in Australia, where we've now got sea urchins have taken out all the kelp forests around Tasmania. So you've got species coming out of Australia advasing into Tasmania. And of course, Grand Central for us is the subantarctic islands as the elevator in the room of this shift in our weather systems. So Bellini Islands, there's no plate tectonics in Antarctica, or very little. It's very much inert. And last time I said that, I was with a group of US politicians, and I just said there's no earthquakes in Antarctica, and Christchurch earthquake erupted at that minute. But this is Bellini Islands, and this is the start of our plate tectonics. And what the story I'm going to take you is up from Bellini Islands, up through this gigantic fault system as the two plates move together. And we're going to go from Macquarie through the subantarctics to southern Stewart Island. And this area, Bellini Islands, hugely important for us. It's a sort of great feeding area for the whales that come through Australia. It's got chinstrap penguins, which we don't see on this side of Antarctica. So in terms of an ecosystem, it's fascinating in terms of what happens in the Southern Ocean. And this is Macquarie Island. Now, the problem on Macquarie Island is as we get more of these westerlies, the storms are coming through quicker and faster, and there's less moisture, less rainfall, and the alpine communities dry out really quick. And these are some of the alpine communities, and some of our staff have been involved in getting rabbits off there, and we're getting this drying of these alpine ecosystems very, very quickly because of this change in storm cycle. And when we get to the subantarctics, similar thing going on. We're not poking out in that westerlies as much, and our albatross are struggling, and it's not just fisheries. We know that there is something else going on. Our rockhopper penguins on Campbell Island have had a huge decline. Our yellow-eyed penguins are struggling in New Zealand, and one of our scientists thinks this could be the start of some of these species, like sea lion and yellow-eyed penguin, that came out of the subantarctic back into the subantarctic. So Auckland Island sits at a real critical phase of working out how our climate systems have moved to the south and what is the impact on our ecosystems. And this is a rain event that happened in 2014, where we lost a third of Antipodes Island. We'd never recorded a rain event this big. So we went back, we're doing the eradication of mice there, and a third of the island, including our hut, you can see it just disappeared through sleep events. So these are pretty big storm events that we haven't seen in living memory. And this is Cyclone Eta, which was May 2014, and the trouble is as your westerlies around the Southern Ocean increase, it creates a space for the tropical systems to come down. And New Zealand's grown up with this westerly wind, and suddenly our forests are getting hit by easterlies from these tropical systems that are now filling the space. And Cyclone Eta was the biggest we've had in living memory. Those winds came out of valleys like the Wataroa, the Hokitika River, right through to northwest, and at speeds of up to 200 kilometres an hour, and we lost 22,000 hectares of forest in the space of 5 hours. So we just have never seen these types of storms, and this storm, a typical storm for DOC, is costing us between $500,000 and $1 million. So every time I see a storm tracking towards New Zealand, you're thinking, how the hell are we going to fix this? And Cyclone Ida, we had to fly in people from all over the country. We brought in US volunteers with chainsaws because we just had a massive job to do with all our tracks. So the key is to open things like Hefe, Whangapeka, but we've only just opened the inland pack track. So the other one is on Great Barrier Island, and that storm, we just spent $2 million doing up the equivalent of a great walk on Great Barrier. We were a week from opening it, and we had $1 million worth of damage, and we've only just reopened that. So we've got to think quite strategically about our investments, and we know these storm events are going to cost us a lot of money. So we've got to think about climate change in all our decision making, and do we actually put $1 million investment back into Great Barrier? This is Antipodes $1 million mouse that those people arriving back in New Zealand, and that's something we are world leaders at. In 1988 was our first island eradication, and we've now down to things like 10,000 hectares at Campbell Island, and we are world leaders in terms of island eradications. So Stewart Islands, we're the first of the southern, so we're following Macquarie Islands, the start of the Southern Alps. That's where the Southern Alps disappears off into the ocean. And this is a bit of fiordland. This is southern Stewart Island, the home of the kakapo. They were found in these mountains up there. We had such a successful breeding season. We've had 36 chicks. The challenge for us is now we haven't got any space for these birds. And we've got so successful at bringing these birds back. We've taken Takahi to 300 for the first time. We've taken kakapo to 150. We need more real estate for kakapo. So one of the ideas is we bring kakapo back into this area. It'll mean taking out rats and cats together, and do we look at peninsulas? But this is a phenomenal area. Of course, it's also under tension because New Zealand's running out of cold water. So our marine aquaculture is a $1 billion industry, and it's centred mostly at Marlborough Sounds. So places like Port Pegasus are of intense interest for aquaculture. So this is the tension we get into. Is this a place for nature? Is it a place for commerce? What do we do? This is the start of the Southern Alps, the Tin Range, one of the most remarkable landscapes in New Zealand. So the thing that keeps me awake is this beast. And this is the Alpine Fault. It's the second most active fault in the world in terms of movement. It's moved about 700 kilometres in 25 million years, and the only one more active than this is the Altan Targ Fault in Tibet. It's rocking along at about 3 centimetres a year, and we know that the red hills up here were all matched with the red hills down here. So that's how much we've shifted. It's had 4 failures in 900 years, and the last failure was in 1770. Now, the issue for DOC is most of our tourism and most of our mountains are centred along the fault. You can see that classic shot from space. Now, the failure would be catastrophic, and we have more staff at places like Franz and Fox and Haast and Milford and Glenorchy and Aoraki than any other agency. So we are typically going to be the first response until systems kick in about how we respond to such a catastrophe. And the last 300 years, we know from some of the wonderful work that GNS and NIWA have done, it just doesn't stop there. It went on for maybe 10 years. And we know from lake sedimentation and some of the lakes around Lake Brunner that the sediments flowed out of these valleys for 10 years. So you've got to think aftershocks, you've got to think massive slip events in our mountains, you've got to think the loss of huts, swing bridges. We're going to have to respond. We're going to have people all through our mountains. We could have 3,000 people at Milford Sound. We could have 1,000 people here, roads blocked, and basically our radio systems, our response systems are probably the first cab off the rank until New Zealand kicks into action. So there's a 30% chance in the next 50 years of this failure, and this is why we're working with Civil Defence. Could we get Hercs into Milford? You know, if we lose, how do we actually pull 3,000 people out of Milford if they're trapped there? So these are sort of things we really need to think through. You know, in places like Franz, we know that the fault goes right through the town. As we shift the town to new bits of town, we know we've got that a big flood event. It's going to cost us about 50 to 60 million just to fix the problems at Franz. So some of our communities that are in the path of the biggest issues in terms of flood events or the failure of the fault are also our communities that have the lowest rating base in New Zealand. So we've got to think how we work as a country to deal with this, because there's a 30% chance in the next 50 years it will fail, and my staff will be pretty much first responders in that area. So this is, you're going to have a talk by Simon Cox on collapsing mountains. This is Gardner Hut. We think quite strategically now about where we place a hut, because we've lost 3 Johns, with people in it. We could have equally lost people in this hut at Gardner. Fortunately, it doesn't get a lot of use. But every hut we now we actually think through these hazards. We don't make a decision in the mountains without geotech, because we know these mountains are in trouble in terms of a lot more failure than we've seen recently. We don't know why, but hopefully Simon will talk to some of that. So this is just the loss of ice. This is in the space of 4 years from NIWA study says we lost 34% of our ice since 1977 when Trevor Chin started the glacial mapping project. 60% has come from our smaller alpine glaciers. The bigger glaciers have been slower to respond, but they're responding now. And as we've lost that access onto the Tasman, onto the Fox and Franz glaciers, we've got these new attractions developing like Tasman Lake, which has now got 40,000 people a year and another big business. We've had to work with Ngāi Tahu Tourism, we've had to work with glacier guides as they lose that foot access onto the glacier and how they then develop a helicopter access. So with helicopter access, we're now putting 30,000 landings into Westland National Park. So every time you do this, so this is how dynamic the system is. Suddenly you've got a product that's selling at $150 and you've got to increase the price to $350. We've got to allow more glacier landings, and we've got to do it within a park planning process, and we've got to do it without really annoying climbers who also value this space. So these are tricky decisions that we constantly have to work through. Allowing a new concession on that lake, it's become a major tourist attraction as that lake has developed. So the other problem of warmer winters is we're giving a real edge to these colonisers. Pinus radiata came in from California. A big problem at the moment is Douglas fir. And formerly it was contorta pine, but Douglas fir, it tends to be more hardy in the higher zones, and it is now exploding through our countryside. And this issue is going to be one of the big issues for our alpine landscapes. And if you drove in to Araki last night and just looked up in the tussocks, you would have seen little pines popping out everywhere. They typically take about 6 years to pop out of the tussock, and they produce their first cones by year 7. And as we get increasing wind events, they then take the seed source further. So Molesworth Station is an area of 160,000 hectares. It was completely free of wilding pines until the Wahine storm in 1968 blew the seed out of Hamner, and it's basically cartwheeling through that landscape. So this year, the government has given us 16 million to start this is just the Queenstown Basin, and our predictions are within 40 years that basin would be completely green. And if you look behind Queenstown, all those pines are wilding pines. So fortunately, Queenstown's been one community who's really led the charge on that, but our wonderful tussock landscapes are under incredible threat to wilding conifers. And this is Battle for Our Birds, an area where we're actually trying to bring back, this is large-scale 1080, to bring back birds. We've got kaka in there at some of the highest densities in New Zealand, mohua. Wasps arrived here in 1946, and then the German wasps in 1972, and they quickly went to the highest densities in the world. And just this year, we've invented an fipronil to deal with wasps. We're now seeing rats out in open tussock. So everywhere we're starting to give these invaders an advantage, and we've just announced a vision for predator-free New Zealand that by 2050, we can kill rats, stoats and possums. So we're talking of new technology, new science to be able to break through that. And we'll be putting $7 million a year into the community with philanthropy partnerships to do that. And we didn't think we could do islands in 1988, so this is New Zealand's moonshot to try and bring these landscapes back. So the other issue is helicopters and the increasing tourism, and New Zealand took 15 years to go from 2 to 3 million. We're going to take about 5 years to go from 3 to 4 million. We've got 80 helicopters working between Franz, Cook and Queenstown. Westland, 30,000 landings. Aoraki has been the biggest increase, 3,500 landings. And Milford, 6,500 landings. Of course, the tension has been at Milford with this ice plateau. And this is the Ngapunatoro ice plateau. And we've got numbers there of 700,000 people. And their park plan has had 10 landings a day. And we've agreed to look at the science of increasing that up to 80 landings or a figure thereabouts. But this is the tension that we've got to face with Ngāi Tahu, with Federated Mountain Clubs, with commercial business. Because clearly 10 landings a day for 700,000 people is not going to go. So we've got to find this balance between wilderness values and increasing tourism and the predictions of New Zealand going to 5.5 million tourists by 2025. So the other conflicts we have is obviously the hunting issue. That's 40,000 trophies have gone out of New Zealand in 10 years, worth on average about $25,000 a hunter. The sixth most popular destination for US hunters, the use of helicopters, which brings in tension against our traditional recreation hunters and how we find a solution through that. The increasing access for mountain bikers into our mountains using helicopters. And the alpine huts. Plateau hut, slightly more expensive than staying here at the Hermitage. That's what it costs the New Zealand taxpayer. 240 people stayed there last year, 800 bed nights. So clearly it's a net loss to the taxpayer. Mueller hut, 3,000 people, 100,000 revenue coming out of that hut. Tasman Saddle, one of our oldest huts. How do we keep it going? What's the model that we need? Because this is a net cost to the government of providing these huts. In Westland National Park, virtually the maintenance has been taken over by the Alpine Guides, and we're very privileged to have some of those guys here who have led that model of how the commercial community runs the whole waste management in terms of those huts. Guys like Otto Dorflinger have worked out how to get that water out of those huts, and through our money that we're putting into our Outdoor Recreation Consortium is giving them money and giving locals the ability to run these huts. So we've got to look at these models here as we deal with this issue. And you know, I do credit Mikey Palmer with his ideas of waste, and do we, in Antarctica, when we worked for Hugh Logan, we worked in the dry valleys, we packed out all our human waste. It took a while to get used to it, but we got used to it. Do we need to do that sort of thing here? Outdoor Recreation Consortium, we've got 900 huts. We can't afford to maintain these. So we've put $500,000 on the table to Federated Mountain Clubs, Alpine Club, and this is the pre and post of Tunnel Creek Hut. This is what people of New Zealand are getting out and doing every weekend, and this is so much better in terms of the ownership of these hut networks and what DOCS looks after its core business and what it looks after through that. The Rakura National Park, this is you know, Great Walks, 50% increase since we started marketing this with Air New Zealand in 2011. So we're dealing with 38,000 extra walkers, 13,000 alone in last year. The cycleways, particularly around northwest Netland, we've got this huge product, and this is one of the legacies our Prime Minister will be measured for, is that $100 million investment into cycleways. These are alpine cycleways, and this could be one of the best networks in the world. Tongariro, and we're going to hear the stories there, but you know, record numbers of 2,000 to 3,000 people on that walk. How do we deal with it? How do we deal with volcanic hazards? You know, this volcanic hazard is one of the key issues we face as managers. Te Araroa track started 3 years ago, 500 walkers. This is Blue Lake, the most pristine lake in New Zealand. We now have nights of up to 54 people. We've got a 14-bunk hut. Most of them camp around the lake. They swim in the lake. They use shampoo. How do we actually, 500 people walking through New Zealand on a $90 hut pass and we're having to face the costs of flying out all the human waste. It really doesn't stack up. So the walkers are paying on average about $3 a night. So we've got to work out how we deal with these models. And of course, a new version of nature is emerging. Te Rawera, they talked out that the concept of ownership, which Maori never had, it was common ownership. The land, you look after the land and the land looks after you. And this is one of the great strides that we're taking as a nation, is how we rebuild our understanding of nature. And this is the first mountain in New Zealand to see the sun. This is Ngāti Porou, Mountains to See, and bringing that whole cultural experience, that sense of spiritualism back into mountains. And this is one we're doing with Taranaki Iwi, where we've put together a 25 million package with Next Foundation, a number of prominent sponsors in Taranaki to take every predator off that mountain and protect it with all the farmers around. And we're about to start that one. So we can actually restore whole ecosystems. And the last slide, a new concept that has been launched by Michelle Obama with Finland, Canada, South Africa, Australia. Healthy parks, healthy people. You've seen that National Geographic every month. They're profiling one of these parks. They had a great speech done in the January one about the value that we can get by introducing people into nature. There's some of our Tūwhare Toa wardens that walk on the Tongariro crossing with the US ambassador, who's been involved in the launch in New Zealand, and getting people to understand the health benefits of getting out into parks, and one of the real things that we're trying to do as an international community. Kia ora, thank you very much.